Hello, everyone, and welcome to Equilibrium, the product security conference hosted by Security Compass. If this is your first time joining us, thank you so much for being here. And if this is your second year joining us, welcome back. We have a jam-packed day filled with amazing speaking sessions, a training session, which includes a complimentary training course, a product demonstration, and more. We also want you to check out our virtual booth, chat with other attendees, and chat with the Security Compass team. As you may have noticed, on the left side of this event space, there is a section that says Engage to Win. This is for those that love a little healthy competition. Complete the Equilibrium Challenge and be entered into a draw for your chance to win an Apple Watch Series 7. Now, there are some rules for each of the challenges, so you have to pay attention and explore the event space. Without further ado, our live stream is about to get started. And up first, we have our first panel session of the day, building quality threat models across a product supply chain with Simone Kurki Hassan, Lotfi Ben Othmain, and Altaz Villani. Altaz, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you, Raquel. Appreciate that. And thanks everybody for joining us today for this discussion. Feel free as we go through the panel discussion, let's make this interactive. Feel free to put things in chat. We'd love to get your thoughts, your feedback. The intent here is to work as a community to help us build security across the product supply chain. And with that, what I'd like to do is just ask our panelists, Simone and Lotfi, if you could just turn on your cameras. And I believe Hassan will be joining us shortly as well. And just before we get started, I think it would be appropriate if each of you could introduce yourselves, talk a little bit about your background, and how your interests in threat modeling connect with the discussion that we're going to be having. So Simone, I'd like to start with you, please.
Thank you very much, Altaz, and thank you for having me for this wonderful initiative. I'm Simone Kurki, Principal Consultant from Microsoft Services, and I've worked a lot on threat modeling for many years. My main interest has been security even before joining Microsoft 22 years ago, and I've started pretty early to perform threat modeling. So I have more than 10 years of experience specifically on threat modeling, and also I'm an author of a tool called the Threats Manager Studio.
Wonderful, great, thanks Simone. And Lotfi, if you could introduce yourself as well, please.
Good morning. Thank you, Altaz, for organizing this event. It's awesome discussion we're gonna have. So my name is Lotfi Ben Othmain. I am Clinical Associate Professor at the University of North Texas. I started working on software security over 10 years ago in an industry project. So, in that experience, I learned a lot of things, including threat modeling. Since then, I've done a lot of empirical studies to assess how people they do threat modeling and how things would change. So from my early experience with threat modeling over 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and now doing academia and scholar on threat modeling.
Fabulous, nice to have you. And Hassan, if you can introduce yourself as well, please.
Thank you so much, Altaz. Thanks for having me in. I'm Hassan Yasser. I'm a technical director at the Software Engineering Institute, part of the Carnegie Mellon University, and also I'm a faculty member at the CS department and teaching software security and DevOps courses. So I have been seeing a lot of problems on getting threat modeling implementation in the software lifecycle, especially on the current DevSecOps practices or agility. And I see a lot of difficulties to really using threat modeling as dynamic perspective and integrate into the software lifecycle is becoming very challenging. And I would like to discuss today how can we overcome those challenges and what needs to be done.
Wonderful, thanks Hassan. And folks, I'm Altaz. I work at Security Compass. My focus is really external collaboration, talking about where we are as an industry, what can we do to advance the body of knowledge around it. And today we're here to talk really about a specific segment of that, and it's all around threat modeling and not threat modeling in the context in sort of isolation, but really looking at threat modeling across a product supply chain. We are here to talk about products today, products that we ship out, products that can be used that include software components in them. So let's just hit the ground running here. When we talk about threat modeling, one of the challenges that we typically see is different teams produce different levels of quality when it comes to threat modeling. So the panelists that are here today, we've all been engaged in doing extensive studies around threat modeling. We've pulled together our experiences, and this seems to be a common theme. You know, how do we produce a high quality threat model? But before we even get down that path, it's important for us to define, what do we mean when we talk about a high quality threat model? Simone, you want to kick us off with this discussion? What are your thoughts?
Thank you very much. First of all, perhaps for some could be useful to recall very briefly what a threat model is. Mm-hmm. And I will say simply that threat model is a way, a security practice to analyze a system, any system, not necessarily an application, even an infrastructural system, or a product, a physical product even, and to understand that system from a security perspective, how that works, and how it is possible to compromise it, how it could be exploited, what are the potential vulnerabilities in that system, and then identify how you can cope with those issues. What are your alternatives? This is a very powerful approach to design secure solutions and to address potential problems even before they happen. So the power of threat modeling is that you can apply that very early, even during the design phase. And for this reason is very different than other approaches to security that we have right now. When we talk about quality, quality is a very important topic. And to me, quality is deeply linked to the value. And the value related to threat modeling is about the ability to give awareness about the risk that you may face, and give awareness about the losses that you can face due to the potential attacks that may happen. But most importantly, to give you a very good idea about what you can do so that you can build upon that knowledge to define a strategy to address those problems. I will say that just for starters.
Yep. And we'll dig deeper into this as well. So Hassan, you want to add your thoughts to this when we talk about high quality threat modeling? What does that imply exactly?
So I'm going to open up as Simone has started discussion, like specifically what we can do for mitigate those risks. And I'm going to put the position of effectiveness of mitigation across the life cycle. Like, how can we integrate those mitigation strategies into the life cycle? This is, if it is threat modeling is really standalone by itself, we may not be able to take a leverage of it. So integration will be a key point of integrating each of the model into our software lifecycle or the system lifecycle that we are dealing. And other things I would like to add it here as well. We have to create some actionable outcome. Like, what are the actionable outcome means that we are expecting from threat modeling? Yes, it's great to have what they're expecting. It's kind of related with the mitigation strategy that we discussed. And it can be kind of, what is next? What are we going to do? So we find out something that we done the mitigation and look at maybe the result of the product lifecycle that we are gathering. Now, if we see something is different, can we go back and analyze the model again, or can we create some actionable steps of our work that we were looking for it? And other things I would like to add here as well, Altes, and I think a little bit Simone touched topic too. You should have really create a value of the threat modeling for business perspective. Yes, we are looking for a risk analysis. We are looking for the loss. What is the value that we are bringing to the organization? it's really, really important to define some sort of justification or the reasoning why we are doing it. Because most of the time, when I look at the security perspective based on typical implementation that I have been seeing it, and usually kind of we are late to allocate enough budget or enough effort for the security work because we never plan accordingly, or we never really create some quantification or the value that impacted the organization business. So specifically, we should really think about what is the value for the organization, including other stakeholder too. Maybe start from the value for the business perspective, and also there is a value related to other stakeholders like a developer, architect. And if the developer knows the reason they have to address some threats based on the mitigation, they see some connections of their work. Same thing for the product master or the product owner if people are following the Scrum methodologies. So there is a relationship of their work, what they do, so they can plan accordingly.
Yeah, it's interesting. It really is moving towards something that is cross-functional, where we include the architects, like you were saying, we have our product owners and folks in that particular role as well. And we'll dig a little bit deeper into this. I don't want to stay just at a high level, but I want us to get down to actual core implementation and what we could do to produce a high quality threat model. Lotfi, do you have your thoughts initially, just when we talk about a high quality threat model, what that means from your perspective?
Thank you, Altes. I think when we talk about quality in general, we use a reference model. So if I say that the application, it has a good performance, then I have a requirement for the performance. If I have the application is secure, then it actually addresses a set of security requirement. But how did we come to the security requirement? We come to the security requirement in general through the threat model. And now the problem is, what is the reference model for the threat model? So, Altes, we've done empirical study on the practice of threat modeling, and we asked an expert about this question when they do threat modeling. And the answers, they were referred, for example, to compare that it complies with the standards, for example, whether that was for operation system and so on. So there is a reference, and that reference are the requirement for a given standards for the automotive and so on. Or in some instances, it is referred to the expertise of the person who does the threat modeling. It is, threat modeling is of high quality when it comes from a given person that has 10 years of experience, and obviously they got the time to work thoroughly over that. So now we shift the talk about quality to the expertise of the person. In some instances, we got that the threat model is of high quality if it is done by, let's say, one person by security expert, and a second security expert of good expertise find that actually they have the same, they identify the same threats. They don't identify much more than that. It is assumed that if an attacker is going to get this application, then there will be an agreement over the threat model. An agreement in the sense that both are similar. So those are the three basic information that we found people, security experts judge the quality of threat models. I agree with Hassan and with Simone that when we talk also about threat modeling, we need to talk that it is giving a value to the company. So then we would talk that it is of good quality. It addresses the main issue of that particular application. So in the general sense of the term, so those are very important.
And so what I'd like to do now is I'd like us to keep in mind this whole life cycle that's come up a few times so far in our discussion, the life cycle of the product itself. Connect that with the fact that we don't have enough security people to go in there and help to construct a threat model across the product lifecycle. So we have upstream teams or inheriting components that maybe downstream teams have developed. And how are we going to bring all of this together and create a product ultimately when it gets aggregated at level one, that it is going to be a secure product that gets pushed out? Right now, these are good high level principles. What I'd like to do is let's dig a little bit deeper now and start to talk about the nuts and bolts of constructing the threat model itself. So I want us to talk now, what are the challenges with building this quality threat model, not within the scope of just a component, but let's take a look at it also when it comes to the entire product lifecycle itself. And this doesn't just include the build part of it, but also when we deploy, now it's in the wild, it's out there, it's open, it's exposed. How do we bring threat modeling across the life cycle? You know, we talked earlier about the fact that threat modeling needs to be cross-functional, and in so doing, let's now stretch this and start to think about threat modeling across the product life cycle. We've spoken about this as a group, but let's bring this out a little bit now and start to talk about some of these challenges. So Hassan, you want to offer your thoughts on this initially?
Yes, thank you, Altes. I think the biggest challenges on the typical threat modeling I have been seeing it implementation is we are really, it's becoming more, it's kind of a static implementation I have been seeing it, which is, it is not automated, it's manual or static, and which is one element. And second one is more siloed. It's really maybe that we should put the siloed in the first priority as the challenges. When we say the siloed, like threat modeling team or the modeler are working by themselves, you see the key point out is we need to integrate. Integration means not the tooling perspective. Integration is also requiring the team communications. Like if the threat modeler are doing the work in a vacuum, not getting enough information for the SOC team, not coordinating with the business value, whatever they are producing will not create an output, actionable outcome, because silo is becoming a big challenge. And probably we should maybe list the quality model. I think we kind of touched a little bit. We said it's going to be risk-based, but we can put a threat model in a center of, as a security perspective, and talking with other stakeholders. So to eliminate silos. Let's talk about the challenges a little bit more. Maybe we can dive into the solution a little bit later on for the challenging perspective. So specifically on the challenging pieces, I would like to open up more on how are we really creating some sort of the tooling and automation that we discussed. And also we have discussed about the different processes. Let's say we are talking about the different team members or different organizational lifecycle. They may have different processes, which is creating another challenge for us. We are agreed on sharing information. But if the process is blocking the sharing the current security posture, maybe another big challenging problem for organization, because as the threat model kind of doing the based on the what knowledge that we have, if there isn't enough knowledge for intelligence, our model may not be relevant to the current domain, current problem that we are dealing, which is about informations and sharing information gathering. So maybe process is blocking to share that type of environment. And I'm going to add one more challenging for the work-wise and hand over to the other my colleagues. And probably we are creating and so much threat modeling concept at the beginning as overthinking, because our architectures keep evolving. We cannot address any possible threat in a system that we don't know the architecture yet. And try to really solve the architecture, the overall marching architecture at the beginning to try to create a threat model may not be relevant because our architecture evolving. Which is kind of like in other things we said at the quality perspective, we are expecting threat modeling should be more agile, more lean. But if you try to create a model at the beginning as overall systems, which is kind of overthinking at the beginning, may not be relevant at the moment that developers are working on it.
Interesting. So Simone, I'm going to ask you to dig a little bit deeper then on this as well. Like, so we've got these threat models that are created manually. They're not dynamically updated. But what does that mean for a threat model itself? Does that mean we miss certain data flows now? Does it mean that mitigations are missed? What are the issues that emerge because of what we've discussed so far when it comes to the threat model itself? Are you able to offer your thoughts and insights on this?
Yes, thank you. Threat modeling is first and foremost a learning experience. And the fact that you do not approach that as an evolutionary process and an evolutionary experience for yourself and for the team may create problems. The fact that you think that your knowledge of a system is complete at a certain moment in time means that you are not going to update the threat model, and you are not going to improve it integrating with new use cases and new scenarios. The fact that you think that you are the best, and this is something that actually is also highlighted by the threat modeling manifesto. We do not have threat modeling heroes. Even experienced people have their problems. Let me tell you this. If I take any threat model I did 1 year ago, 3 months ago, I would find very bad mistakes from my side. That's normal. I'm not the same person. Perhaps the conditions I did those threat models have changed. My understanding evolves continuously. And this happens also for everyone. If threat modeling is also an experience that needs to be done collectively. This is something where, yeah, you may lead the experience as an expert, but if you don't make sure that everyone understands that the quality of the analysis is a global, collegial responsibility, is a responsibility of the development team, of the security team, of the threat modeling expert, then you may have problems. So to return to your question, the problem that we may face is to have a less valuable threat model, something that may require you to go and fix things that are not a problem. There are some controls in place, and here perhaps the term controls is not exactly proper. You know, if you put inside your analysis a consideration where you say, for example, that there is a huge risk. Let's make a real example. Okay, you have a database. The database is inside a network, and a virtual network is not accessible from external systems, and there is just a transparent encryption. And you say, okay, we may have an attacker from external who would access the database and compromise the database. Therefore, we need to perform client-side encryption. And this is a critical severity risk. That will be a bad job. That will be a bad job. That will require to make investment on developing things that are not required. Why? Because there are already some controls in place. If you do that, you will miss instead other problems. Like, for example, you are not covering SQL injection in that case. And instead, you should validate the input, you should encode the input, you should put in place perhaps a web application firewall to further mitigate the risk. Some controls that you will not focus on because you're focused on things that do not really matter. So having this possibility to talk with the others, even with the teams, the development team, even if they are not experts, and make clear that the threat model doesn't represent the absolute truth. It's a tool to think, it's a tool to understand what are the potential compromises that the solution may face, give alternatives, and allow to drive remediation activities, but in a critical way. That's extremely important. And this aspect, be critical, to be critical and to be self-critical actually is one of the most important skills that a threat modeler must have. I would, if I may, just say something related to the note, threat modeling is manual will be a problem. And we have discussed a lot about this. Now, actually, I don't like much automation. And this is a simple reason. There is a simple reason. Automation is great, okay? Automation is useful, is needed. If you have a very complex system, you need automation, otherwise you will not be able to understand. But a lot of threat modeling approaches, there are many tools, there are many ways of doing threat modeling, are focused entirely on automation. And there is a problem with automation. The automation is designed to identify a tiny piece of your system, one, and then the next one, and then the next one. It is not able to understand the overall picture. It is not able to understand the business. It is not able to understand your solution. It's automated, no intelligence. And this is not what is going to provide you value in the threat model. This is going to cover things that you cannot miss. So that's invaluable. But threat modeling, manual threat modeling done with the structured approach. I'm not saying that there is no structured approach. It's not art. Threat modeling must not be art. We must apply a structured approach that will allow us to think in the right way. And this approach must be taught to people who want to be threat modelers so that they can provide similar results. And from my point of view, this is the answer to the question, how can we provide similar results? How can we ensure that if we have a complex product and we need to split that product in many pieces, we have comparable results so that when we join those results together, we get something valuable and not with a leg, that is too short. So this is the way we needed to have a mindset that is common and is applied by everyone.
Yeah, makes sense. And so Lotfi, let me ask you, when we talk about building quality threat models, sometimes we get into discussions where, you can take a look at a taxonomy or an ontology and say, this is what defines quality in that sense. But what we just heard from Simone is that very ontology or that very taxonomy may in fact be evolving. You may learn new things. There may be things that our current tool sets do not pick up, which we see oftentimes in the emergence of new attacks that come in, that take advantage of vulnerabilities that we've had. Can you talk a little bit, Lotfi, from your perspective on what the challenges you see with building a quality threat model?
Thank you, Altez. Indeed, so having a quality threat model needs people that are critical, and that basically the adversarial mindset of security expert. I want to add that threat model, one of the things that we need for threat modeling is the knowledge base or the ontology, as you said. And historically, 20 years ago, we are talking about web applications. So we have a given ontology of what are the threats for web application. But that thing evolved. After that, we had cyber physical systems. So we had a new set of threats types. And then we have now machine learning. We have a new sets of threat types. So that knowledge base for the threat also increased by seeing what the attacker do. So we see that the attacker, let's say they manipulate the machine learning or neural network of the image. Oh, there is a threat here that we need to add it to our taxonomy. So the taxonomy evolves based on our understanding of what are the landscape, the attack landscape, and also what the attacker do, what information we get. Besides that, I agree with my colleagues that knowledge of the system is very important, and there are challenges to understand systems, especially when they are complex. I have here to add two other things since we are talking about supply chain. One thing is the use of dependency. So when we talk about threat model, we should account for dependency. And dependency, they would include whether malicious dependency or dependency that could become malicious, or vulnerability in dependency. And what is the impact of different vulnerability in different a dependency on the threat model of the application itself. Because in general, this is an abstraction. I'm going to talk about the threat model for the given system that I have at hand, which I'm going to develop using DevOps, but there are dependencies there, and those dependencies, they will going to impact the threat model. The second thing is the process itself. So in the recent study that we had, we took an example of application. We've seen how an attacker actually, they could misuse Kubernetes, or they could misuse other software that are used in the development chain, such that they transform an application from a secure, potentially secure application where we know the threat model to an insecure application where we have different threats that we did not account for. So because we had the threats that are related to the development lifecycle itself, or actually the supply chain itself, that made the threat model different, the threat model of the application different as we went through. So it is challenging to build quality threat model, the system. So knowledge about the system, the knowledge about the threat landscape that would apply to the system, and the experience to know that. And that is an incremental, or things evolving over there. Also accounting for threats that would apply to working in a supply chain.
Interesting. And so we find that there would be vulns that exist across the supply chain. And if our ontology isn't able to adapt to these vulnerabilities that exist, how could we potentially threat model this, right? There has to be some way to aggregate this stuff as we go through the supply chain when we look at components of the product and eventually the aggregation. So there's a lot that we can talk about that, but let me just turn over to Hassan. Hassan, you want to add some thoughts on the discussion so far as well?
Yes, I would like to add it because Simone brought a good point about the threat modeling automation. And when I talk about automation, actually, I was not meaning that we have to have automated tool is creating model for us. I completely agree, Simone, because threat modeling is the way of thinking. It is requiring understanding the current architectures and understand the risks and security, because risk and security is really the matter that we have to align together. It depends on the risk, how much we're going to tolerate it, depends on what we are trying to address those risks to eliminate any security problems. So again, we are looking for automation as output of the threat model that we created. Somehow we can make it as part of our life cycle. And then adding to what Lotfi said, I like that for the dependencies, it's really, we are dealing about the complex problem now. The complex problem is really extended in having a multiple systems, multiple software, multiple vendors. Like if you look at the really current development activities or any type of building a product, we just get component here and there. We are connecting the dot together. So it's really, we can look at maybe a higher level, and then we should be more agile, more lean, looking for the dependencies as an example, looking for the other vulnerabilities as an example, try to address those possible, the problems it may go wrong, and by thinking. And we are generating the diagram as a result. Now we are talking about automation of integrating those components into the software or system lifecycle that we are talking about. So I know you might, Simone, you're gonna jump as well. So
Simone, your thoughts?
Yes, thank you. Now, actually, I totally agree, but this brings a different angle to that, I will say, and is, okay, we have done this threat model, and it has been a nice exercise. We are all happy for that. And now what? And this is where a lot of threat modeling tools fall short, unfortunately. A lot of, when threat modeling is born, essentially it tried to answer a problem. And the problem is, okay, we have best practices, we have controls we needed to put in place. Shall we implement everything? Or shall we do something that brings value specifically to that solution? So what is the answer? Let's understand what are the potential attacks to our systems, the threats. And then we link the threats to the controls, and at that point, those controls make sense, and we can start implementing them. But a lot of those tools, those approaches, focus only on the threats, stop short of making the value. So we need to move from the threats to the mitigations, because at the end of the day, still they are really what matters. What matters is to understand what needs to be done. Why is fundamental, but what is also a key topic. And that what, as Hassan was saying, needs to be actionable, needs to be selected. You need to select, you have 100 different activities you can choose from. You need to select the 10, 20 that are required, really required. And then you need to ensure that those things become part of your backlog and they are prioritized in the right way and implemented in the right way. So this step, and I agree, needs to be seamless, as seamless as possible. And this is a problem that in particular free tools have. They do not integrate well with the DevOps systems. So this makes much harder to move from a situation where you do the security analysis using the threat model to actually making those findings and those controls activities, tasks that can be prioritized and implemented.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up. When I have had discussions with developers who are responsible for producing secure systems, essentially from a coding perspective, right? We can't have a high level metric that would say, hey, you know, create secure code, for example. We have to dig down a little bit deeper on that. So when we talk about these mitigations as part of offering value to the development team, the requirements that go in have to be understandable and digestible in their work streams as well. So can it be tested? Is there a clear acceptance criteria? Is there a clear testing criteria for this? And bringing that back, you know, and offering the feedback and saying, we attest that this has been done appropriately. And then we can use like code scanners and things like that as well to go in there and show that this work has in fact been completed. But it is driven by the focused attempt at the early stages to identify what are the potential threats that we've got, and can we close these things off early on. Right now, in a supply chain, it may in fact be that when we find a particular vulnerability, or if there's something in our threat model that we think is a potential threat scenario, then it may in fact impact more than one component. And so the idea of sharing now is not just limited to just that organization, but may in fact be broader across the supply chain to say, there is something that we have identified here. Can we please make sure that we mitigate this, you know, going forward? How do we mitigate what we've, you know, whatever has been put out up until now, and going forward, how do we add the necessary controls so that we begin gradually to ensure that the product is secure early on as we begin to aggregate things going forward. I think this is a really important point when we talk about it from a supply chain perspective. We have standards, we have frameworks. How do we make these things actionable to the teams that are responsible ultimately for the creation process of this? And of course, there's other things when we go in and we've deployed a product. What happens when we have a fix, but someone decides at the, you know, at the end that, you know, I don't want to do this, or I can't deploy this mitigation right now, right? So some of these really sort of complicated issues begin to emerge when we talk about a supply chain. But let's just keep moving forward. You know, we're touching a little bit here on checking across the product life cycle, which may in fact cut across different teams in different organizations. Some may be small, some may be large, some may have very mature security practices, some may not have mature practices. So there is this need to go in there and verify that the model that has been created meets a certain level of criteria around quality. Whether it's, have you identified the critical systems? Have you ensured that you've got data flows that exist from a user through the system and any intermediary components, for example? You know, so let's talk a little bit now about when should we be performing quality checks on our threat model across this supply chain? And Lotfi, I'm going to start with you. You've had a chance to talk to, a number of people, and they work across a number of different areas of the product lifecycle. Can you offer initially your thoughts on when should we be performing quality checks? And even if you want to dig down into what are some of the quality metrics that we can use to verify this?
So having quality checks for threat modeling is really very important. So I did not see in the study that we have done an agreement of how they would make, what criteria they would use for these checks. But when do they do that? So obviously, when we do the design of the system at the beginning and you have a threat model of the supposed to be system, there must be some checks at that point. The checks, mostly they are arbitrary checks, such that does it address given set of threats? Are they there? Do we understand the system very well? Do we address? So there would be aspects that are related to the process of doing the threat model more than the outcomes. So those are the checks that people they said they do. So do we understand the system? Do we have good knowledge of the threat landscape? Do we have a reference model like standards and so on? But the first check is when they do the design, when they have the initial threat model. The other check for when they use an agile, the threat model of the system to deliver is different than the system to be. So there needs to be at each of these steps a revision of what threats apply to the given release and whether we understand the system very well or not, and whether the threats is well documented. Is it possible to identify the tests? Can we test those threats that we describe in the model? So those are different aspects. It is a challenging problem, and I think you are looking forehead here with this question, Altes.
Yeah, interesting. So let me turn to Simone. Yeah, all good. Simone, your thoughts on quality checks for a threat model?
Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, there are formal quality checks you can do and can be done even in an automated way. For example, if I have a data store, which is essentially could be a database or some file server or some hard disk, virtual disk, things like that. And you have a flow incoming where you have only information inserted there and nobody is reading, then there is a problem. Perhaps you have someone who reads and you are not taking account of that. So, and other things like you are not having a trust boundary between an external interactor and a process. This is also something that should not happen, because an external interactor being external to your solution has zero trust. Really, you cannot trust that, even if it is something built by your company. And instead, the process is a piece of your solution, and therefore you need to have a little more trust in that. So you have a separation of trust, a different trust between the two, and you need to have a trust boundary. In my tool, in Threats Manager Studio, I've identified something like 27 different controls like this one. So, and you can think about more, I'm sure. Those formal quality checks can be done by you as a threat modeler, can be done in an automated way to validate the quality of what is provided. But there are also some other controls that you can put. To me, it may be difficult to understand if you have a good representation of the system by yourself, but for sure, if you approach a threat model as an initiative, which is by the expanded team, including also the development team, security team, and the product owners, and all the different roles involved in the project. And you make sure that everyone understands that the threat model is an open document, then you can get feedback. And this to me is a great way to perform quality checks, because by doing simple interviews, it's only normal to have information that is not correct because it's not current, or because you get a different feedback from the different members. I have had very recently, by the way, a couple of customers where a member of the team told me that something was implemented in a way, and then another member the following day told me exactly the opposite thing. So it's and that, if I may suggest a way to track that, the best way is to annotate your threat model. So your threat model should represent your understanding of the system. It's not only the diagram. It's not only the diagram. You needed to keep track of the question you ask and the answer. And a great way to perform a quality check is to ensure to extract those questions and answers and provide them, for example, as an Excel file to the members of the team, so that they can check and they can say, okay, that's right, or no, that's wrong. So this is pretty powerful as an approach, I would say.
Yeah, and so it also builds into the process now the ability to go in there and discuss the remediation, right? And if you have this cross-functional group, you can start to talk about what might be the right remediation to help move forward. Right?
Sorry, just I wanted to add one thing I was missing. Another important aspect is that quality needs to consider the fact that the threat model is not the same document for every member of the team. For developers, the threat model is related to what they need to do. So what are the different mitigations which need to be implemented? And the threat model needed to provide artifacts inside the DevOps system that they use in the way they need it, as Hassan was saying. For the security team, the threat model is something different, is something that should help them to understand if the system represents an issue for a potential risk for the organization or not. And instead, for the product owner, it should provide the information related to how what are the risks and information to make decisions about how to handle this risk. So the quality from that point of view is how well the threat model and the artifacts it produces can help to address those needs.
Okay, Hassan, you have some thoughts on this?
Yeah, I wanted to count a couple of things as well, Altes, and I really like I was about to say that, Simone, I'm glad that you brought up. We are creating a model, and we may look at it a little bit different perspective because the quality may change as we are evolving threat model. Like when we are at the beginning, we may have a different criteria as we are starting at the beginning as creating a model. Then when we get more maturity in our model creations, because we don't want to creating just a static documents and having a graphic in it. Diagram is great. Diagram is visualizing the threat, but we should have the lean thinking. We can update our model as we need a new architectural new components. So going back to the analogies, quality perspective, quality will evolve and quality will change depends on where we are in the maturity. When we are doing the basic threat modeling as at the beginning, maybe a higher level, yes, we should have a formal quality check. We should have it, regardless of where we are, we should do it. But we always align our business risk when I see, because if at the beginning, if we lost the connectivities with our value, it's very hard to establish the trust between threat modeler with the team members. We're going to start with the trust. We are going to start building the why I'm doing this model. Here's the actionable stuff that I'm going to use in as a developer architect, which is aligning with my business prioritizations. Then we will add more quality in terms of relevancy of our business, relevancy of our knowledge domain that we are in, then creating actionable result of each iterations, each work that we can do. It's really key point. If the model is not able to speak to the stakeholders, and it's going to become static. I saw so many examples in my years of work, and it was a great documentation done. It's a perfect diagram. It's kind of listed, but nobody's using it. So what is the benefit of if people are not able to use it? Because they're not able to speak the language of the developer's thinking, or not developer not able to take, or architect not able to use that information to design properly. There's a disconnect over there because it was not integrated into the lifecycle that we are talking about. Integration lifecycle is not just connecting the tools, connecting the people, connecting the business value. I look at that perspective again. It's really creating a good artifacts that people can take and leverage and use it in their environment. Of course, if you have automation, it's a perfect sense. If Simone said, like, if the tool is able to create those artifacts automatically, that'd be great because developer likes to do the secure coding. They don't have enough time. When we plan accordingly, they will have a time to address it. If they don't have enough time, then saying, hey, you have to do this one. It's already too late if they don't have in the planning sessions of their work.
Yeah. Let me pop a question to the panelists in general. Before I get there, Simone, you have your hand up. You have a comment?
Just to give you an example of what Hassan is saying, that I think it will be very useful to consider. One of the most difficult things that I've seen in threat models, doing threat models on the different projects is monitoring. Monitoring as a control is something that nobody does. Simply, in best case, you activate what the infrastructure provides and you're happy for that. But there are a lot of problems that require custom monitoring. It require you to generate events. So what if we could have tools where we could define the need to have a specific event to cover for that. And then we could say, okay, I want that. And instead of generating a task inside some DevOps system, we generated the artifacts actually that will allow to deploy the necessary events, the definition on the system, and perhaps even the code that would, as examples, that could generate those events, so that you need just to copy and paste that in your application, and then even how to issue, generate alerts, security incidents, perhaps even to provision that information in your SIEM of choice. That will be exactly an example of that.
Yeah, and we could pull, yeah, all the SIEM information that comes in and feed that back in to a dynamically updated model, essentially, right? So let me pop a question. This came in from our audience. Sometimes when you deal with quality and quality metrics, if you're not careful, it's possible to go in and to steer the model towards the metrics. Essentially, you end up with unintended behavior here. The goal is to construct a model that has high quality, but if we only focus on, for example, we must have a trust boundary between an external interactor and some internal system or front endpoint, for example, things like that, then we start to go down the path of everything must adhere to the metric that we've got as an example. Not bad. It helps us in terms of us being able to go down the maturity curve and understand how to threat model effectively. Is there a risk when we start to put together some metrics around quality? And it's just looking at this critically and saying, is it possible that we may have the wrong metric? I have some thoughts on this. I think every metric really, you have to assess it from the perspective of what may be the unintended behavioral consequences of that. And, but at the same time, if we don't have a quality metric, then how do we ensure that we are moving in the right direction? How do we measure that we're doing things right? But let me just open it up real quick to any one of you. Do you have any thoughts on this as well?
I can jump in right away, maybe quickly, because the metrics is kind of what matters to the team. We don't want to be creating the metrics just for the sake of metrics. The team should decide what the actionable result of the metrics I'm collecting. So when it goes by the quality check, and as we said, first requirement threat model should be actionable. If you are putting a metrics in it, maybe you're looking for what is the usefulness of model in the life cycle, which is one of the metrics we may say that. And are we able to impact our security defect ratio is another metrics. Look at that perspective, see the effectiveness of threat modeling is a good way to look at the metrics perspective. Again, we are not looking for just specifically how we are doing that well for a diagram. You're looking for how can we use effective in our life cycle and put the metrics on top of them. I'm going to stop here.
Is it reducing our vulns at the end of the day? Can we measure that? Is it having an impact? And therein lies the value of threat modeling. I would like to, before we close off our session, we have maybe 2 minutes left, and I'd like to squeeze this in. When it comes to threat modeling across the supply chain, producing quality threat models, folks may have questions about this. Where do I go? How do I learn more about this? We can't get into all of that in a 1-hour session, but do each one of you have something that you could maybe share to tell people, yes, you can look at this blog, or you can look at this standard or this framework that might help people think about threat modeling from a supply chain perspective and helping them to grow in their maturity. I'll start with you, Hassan, then we'll go to Simone, and then we'll conclude with Lotfi. So Hassan, real quick.
Okay, real quick. I really advise to the folks in sharing the knowledge and look at, again, there are many websites available to look at it and look at from the Linux Foundation, maybe in OWASP and other places, but more about the sharing information with the community members. Be part of the community, be part of the same domain that you are working on it, because not every domain are the same things. Look at your own domain. You're in the healthcare industry, look at the healthcare industry related threat model, you may be seeing that. If you're in the finance is a different obligation, you have to look at that perspective.
Simone?
I would say that it depends on your level, what you would want to get. Personally, I've found very useful a book from Brooke S.E. Schoenfield on threat modeling. That's a great book. At this point, a little old perhaps, but still it's, from my point of view, one of the best. So there are also others. Isar Tarandash and Matt Cole as a very recent book, which is fantastic, in particular if you want to understand how threat modeling can be applied to a development environment. So those are perhaps our two great starting points.
Wonderful. And Lotfi, to wrap it up?
I think the literature on threat modeling is very rich, and my suggestion for whoever security expert wants to work on threat modeling and they want to check the quality, is the first thing is to look for what peers are doing. Let's say for ontology, we are talking about threat model for for systems that include machine learning. So they need to check what is the recent knowledge base on threats that apply to that particular systems. Obviously, I agree that with colleagues that this is team dependent. What matters for the team from quality perspective. So the literature is rich, and as security expert, we need to compare to our peers.
Wonderful. And with that, I'd just like to thank our panelists. I really appreciate you taking the time to come and share your knowledge and your insights with us, with the broader community as well. Thank you to everybody that attended our session today as well. We look forward to ongoing discussions. And with that, we will conclude our session. Thanks.